Welcome to Slayer the Alchemist, where we discuss all things heavy metal and hard rock. On today's episode, every record has a story. I'm going to be sharing with you some albums that take me back to very specific places in my life. I'm going to do this with a couple of different topics, like albums that maybe remind me of a certain time in my life, certain people in my life, or bring back specific memories. But these particular records, they bring me back to a very specific place. And a lot of times when I hear these records or think about these records, I can picture myself in those places. There's a very specific area and place that these records bring me back to. I'm not going to be doing any Black Sabbath and I have a lot of memories with Black Sabbath. They're one of my favorite bands. I'm good, and because I want to do this with Darren on a Sabbath Sunday. So here we go. All right, the first one for me. I've told this story about how I had an uncle. For the longest time, I've been saying he was only 10 years older than me. I was just talking to my mom about this, and he was only 9 years older than me. So this makes even more sense why he was an older brother to me. He wasn't an uncle. I spent a lot of time around him. And this album, he was very much into Kiss. In 1977, 78, he would have been like 17, 18, 19 years. He was a teenager when Kiss was at the peak of their powers. And this record, just talking about it right now, takes me back to his house, my grandparents' house, his room. I can almost hear the creaking on the steps. They had these old steps that creaked when you went up. Then there was a certain smell to like their house, a pleasant smell, wood smell that I always remembered. And you'd go up the stairs, and when you went to the right, his room was the first room on the right. You walked into his room, and right along the wall on the right-hand side, he had a dresser with his record player up there. To the right of the record player was where he didn't take good care of his records. He just sort of stacked them like this. But I can so picture this album sitting there in his room, and I can just picture myself in there, standing there. So this record always reminds me of him. Sadly, he passed away when he was young. I wish he was still around because, like I said, he was more of a brother to me than he was an uncle. But this really takes me back to his room. And he had a lot of Kiss records, but there's something about this particular one that I can just... And his room was always dimly lit. He was sort of messy, so his bed was always a mess and everything. But I can just picture that dresser, his record player. I can see it in my head. I can see this record sitting there. So this always reminds me of my grandparents' house, and specifically my uncle's room. All right, this next one is kind of funny, and I went back, and as I did this, I double checked some of my memories, the dates on this, to make sure that they lined up. And this one does line up. Okay, Crocus, The Blitz. This came out in August of 1984. The specific place I associate with this record is at my parents' house. I remember hearing, and this was kind of abstract from the record, so I actually didn't have the record yet at this time. But they were playing Midnight Maniac on MTV, and it was the morning of my first day of high school. And my parents' house, the upstairs, everything was basically upstairs: the bedrooms, the kitchen, the living room. Downstairs, we had another TV area, and it wasn't quite a basement, but it was like a half basement, sort of. The windows were like on like ground level. And so I was down there, and we had a laundry room, and there was a mirror in the room. And I remember, like, you're getting ready for your first day of high school. I'm all nervous about how I look and stuff like this. And I remember this song playing on MTV while I was sitting there waiting for the bus, and I heard this, and I heard this, and then I ran outside. So for some crazy weird reason, this album, and that song in particular, always takes me back to the laundry room at my parents' house the morning before my first day of high school in 1984. Okay, this is another strange one. It's weird how, again, these records, they conjure up certain memories. Okay, CJSS, World Gone Mad. I had this on cassette, and the memory I have associated with this album is when I was younger, I still have health problems, but when I was younger, I was really sick, and I spent a lot of time in the hospital and stuff like that. And I was really sick, and my mom was getting ready to take me to the emergency room. And I was laying in the back seat of our car in our garage. It was cold, I remember, and I was waiting for my mom. And I had my Walkman, and the only cassette I had with me was this album. And I was sitting there laying on the seat in the car, very sick. And this record takes me back. I can smell the cold air. I can smell our garage, the car. I can feel the car, my parents' car, and just that memory of sitting there, kind of like, oh crap, like, when am I going to be coming home again? Because sometimes I didn't know what was going to happen to me. So this album, for some weird reason, takes me back to my parents, to the garage. And sitting in there in the middle of the night, that was the other thing. It was the middle of the night. It was cold. I'm sitting in the car in my parents' garage. So this is pretty weird. Crocus takes me back to the laundry room at my parents' house. This takes me back to my garage. All right, here's another strange one. Jethro Tull, Heavy Horses. I don't have the original CJSS cassette. I had this. I think I've told this story. I had another uncle who gave me a box of 8-tracks, and inside that 8-track was Heavy Horses. There was a bunch of stuff in there, and one of them was Heavy Horses from Jethro Tull, and that was my first exposure to Jethro Tull. He had Aqualung, Thick as a Brick, and Heavy Horses. But my memory of this is where I grew up, my high school was like a 20-minute drive away. And I lived in Mountaintop, Pennsylvania, but the high school was in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. And just like Mountaintop sounds like, it was a mountain. You had to drive up and down a mountain to get to where my school was. And I think I had like something I was doing after school. Maybe like I used to play for the theater shows the school did. So I was staying at my grandparents' house because this is on my dad's side, not with the uncle who turned me on to Kiss and everything. This was my other grandparents, because they lived not too far from where my high school was. And so I stayed there for a week, and the only music I had was, and this takes me right back. They lived in a small house, but there was a room in the back of their house, and my dad had a big family. Some of his brothers had stayed in the room, but everybody was long gone. But there was a stereo in there, and I don't know why I had Heavy Horses with me, and it was the only thing I had with me. There was no cassette player in the room. It was only an 8-track player. So for that whole week or more that I was there, that I stayed, I think it was like a week or 2 weeks that I was staying at my grandparents' house, and that's all I listened to was Heavy Horses from Jethro Tull. So it so takes me back to that room at my grandparents' house. It was a weird room too, because they had a balcony. There was a door that led out to this open sort of balcony, but it was really old, and so no one was allowed to go out there because they were afraid it was going to like collapse. But I could just so remember that room. They had stuff stored in it, and it was that old 8-track player, and I just would sit there. I think I had my headphones with me and did my whatever I did at school, and then would come back and sit up in that room. There was nothing else to do but sit up in the room and listen to Heavy Horses on 8-track. Okay, this is, I guess I associate some things with being sick. A matter of life and death. I had the flu, and I remember listening to this over and over. I would just put it in I had a CD player to the house that we lived in before the house I live in now, our house in Allentown, Pennsylvania. And we still have the sofa out there. And sometimes I think about this when I'm laying on the sofa in a certain way. Would lay on the sofa, and you know how when you're really sick, you're falling asleep and you're waking up. And all I did was I had A Matter of Life and Death on repeat for like days. So I would just lay on the sofa, sleeping, waking up, and A Matter of Life and Death would be playing. So sometimes when I listen to this record, it so takes me back to that room in our house, the sofa. At that time, I can remember exactly where I was sitting, the window. There was a window right behind where the stereo was, and I could see just everything about it. It takes me back to that room. Okay, this is another one that this is the last one I have here, and I had to check the date on this to make sure my memory was correct on this, and it was. The memory I have of this is getting this on cassette, and my dad used to hunt, and I used to go hunting with my dad. And I remember coming back from hunting, and if anybody who's ever gone hunting, you leave, you want to be outside for deer hunting right when the sun comes up. So you got to leave at like 5 a.m. So you're sitting out there waiting for the sun to come up, and it was freezing. You're out in the woods all day. And I came back home, and For Those About to Rock came in the mail. And I can remember sitting in my room, and it just so takes me back to, and I double checked, this came out November 20th, 1981, which totally lines up because the first day of hunting season is always the day after Thanksgiving, the Monday after Thanksgiving. Actually, as I'm sitting here recording this now, tomorrow is the Monday after Thanksgiving. So whatever that is, like November 27th or whatever. So it did check out. It did confirm my memory that I probably was out on the first day of hunting season, came back, had this. And this, here, listening to this for the first time, so reminds me of my room at that time. At that time, when I got a little older, I moved into a different room in my house. At this particular time, my room was in the front of our house, and I can picture looking out onto our driveway, listening to this album for the first time, like being glad I wasn't outside in the cold in the woods. So this takes me right back to my room, the desk that I had in my room and everything. So, all right, there you go. I think it was 5 records I had. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, 5 albums that take me back to specific places in my life. Every record has a story, right? These particular records, that's what they do for me. Take me back to a very specific room or place in my life. So let me know records for you that take you back to a very specific location in your life, okay? Let me know in the comments down below. Till we see you again, make sure you rock hard, ride free.